Hello and welcome back to Crossroads of Cognizance, where we come to meet with you once a week, every Thursday, to talk about all things healing, magic, and everything in between. How it happens on the East Coast over here at Crystal Cognizance, and how it happens on the West Coast, as far as how it happens at Crossroads Occult Store. So, with that, my introductions are always so weird. But with that, your awkward host over here is Dahlia Rose. I am the keeper, facilitator, and resident gargoyle here at Crystal Cognizance on the East Coast. I serve my community by opening up space. We're going to have a meditation right after this broadcast. And we do healings, we do readings, and we just support the local community in the best way that we know how. And I have a lovely co-host here who's here to introduce herself.
So my name's Katrina Rasbold. My co-host is not at all awkward. She's just self-effacing. I am co-owner of Crossroads Metaphysical Store in Shingle Springs, California, and we do cleansings and healings. We do card readings. We also do a huge variety of classes, and we have a retail presence as well, both online and in person. If you go to crossroadsoccult.com, you will find us.
Yay! So, and tons of amazing products over there. So definitely check out the website. So whenever we get together, it's always a fun time, and you, our lovely community, can participate in all the fun. Hey, Kay! And join us in the comment section. So what that means, I found out last week, is if you are watching us from Facebook, because we are streaming live to Facebook and YouTube, if you are watching us from Facebook, what we want you to do is to click on the video. So you have to actually click on the video to get into the stream so that we can see your comments, because we want to hear from you. We want to answer your questions, and we want to hold space for you if need be and go from there. So make sure you're clicking those comments. YouTube has it under wraps. So, and we're already seeing your lovely YouTube comments. Hi, Sylvia. So this week, I thought we would cover, and we talked a little bit about this before the show, mental health and the awakening process. So we know that
Two mutually exclusive conversations.
You think so? Are you being
One has
sarcastic?
nothing to do with the other as far as
No.
mental health and awakening are so far apart. At least
Well,
good mental
it
health.
seems like people want to do that, right? Like completely separate those boxes, and
They
it's just
do.
not possible. You know,
But we're fearless. We're here for you. We'll talk about how crazy awakening makes you.
literally feel like a crazy person for the first couple bits, and then you get to have multiple awakenings, which is always exciting and fantastic. And at least that's been my experience. And at that point, like, it's like riding in a car. So
It is, yeah. So one of the ways, and Dahlia can attest to this, because Dahlia went through my year-long bio-universal healing class. And one of the first things that I tell those students, because they are just bringing their A game to the energy factor of being a healer and learning all the aspects of being a healer, one of the first things I tell them is make sure your life can accommodate this, because this is going to jack you up. When you really get invested in a life, and really being a healer is about a life, a lifestyle, a life that involves energy manipulation and a study of energy. It's as though the universe says, you got to get yourself straight. You got to get yourself right. And it blows open everything that's dark in you, everything that's scary in you for examination. And I think on a lower scale, that's what happens when you have that awakening. You have that, I guess we used to call it a come to Jesus moment, where everything is held accountable. It's as though the universe says, if you are going to be awake and you're going to learn this and you're going to use energy, you better be using it right. You better be that right kind of person. It'll start forcing you to look at those scary parts. Is that kind of what you were saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the way that you become sensitive and aware is directly associated with what's supposed to transition in and out of your life, finding your, some people, I've heard them reference it as your soul tribe or your soul community, like all of that starts trying to come towards you, meanwhile pushing out what doesn't work. And it can be a very scary process. And the mental health community is having its own revival as far as different diagnoses are concerned, and stigmatization behind different diagnoses. And there's space for both. There's space for, somebody to say, I need to ground, and for it to be a mental health need. No, you won't be able to go into your boss and be like, okay, I'm going through an awakening and I just need this time off. Absolutely not. But
I need a 15-minute break because I'm not grounded.
Right.
But we'll give you a smoke break. We just won't give you a grounding break.
Right. So as you're navigating through this awakening process, there's a number of things that can happen, and the internet is wrought with all of the symptoms. But what I find interesting is that folks try to make that mental health piece mutually exclusive to their awakening, and I think that there's a lot of value in combining the two, as far as bringing in mental health professionals, and then there are occasions where you may need allopathic medicine just because your body is falling so far out of balance that you need that extra little boost. And through that process, hopefully you're working with a clinician or someone whose idea it is to get you off of that eventually. But the stigmatization I was seeing a lot of that over this past week, like, completely being averse to any sort of awareness that there may be mental health concerns. Like, if you were going through your awakening, you're going to likely have episodes of depression. In fact, it may be debilitating. And the thing not to do is to ignore it and just go, okay, well, this is part of my process. You should be calling on community. And if you don't have community, there are things that can be addressed or used, right? And we talk about those all the time. If it's your candles, your crystals, what have you, but don't be afraid of talking to a mental health professional. Katrina, I think, at least as far as I can remember of my process, I was afraid of being like locked up, or like how I would be viewed as far as talking about my experiences. And maybe
Well, there's a reason why here at Crossroads, we're very fortunate in that we have a licensed marriage and family counselor on staff.
And she's amazing.
And so people are able to come in and see a therapist without having to jump through that hoop of saying, oh, and I also talk to things that aren't there, and I think that this rock is sentient, and and all of the things that might get you locked up if it were in a different conversation. Because your therapist is a witch, she's like, oh yeah, okay, but talk to me about what's going on with your mom. She'll just kind of dive through with you. And it's because so many of us, when we're going through that, do have a difficult time. And it's not, there's the practical aspects of living a magical life. Yes, there's a lot of internal shadow work that's going to come up, but there's also the aspect of, how do I talk to my Christian mom about this?
Right.
How do I manage my relationships that were there for me before, but are not ready for me to cross over into being an empowered, strong person? Because magic will demand that of you. It will demand that you are in a good, solid place. And sometimes that involves tearing you down before you get built back up again. And that's really difficult for relationships. They don't.
Uh-oh, we lost some audio. So what Katrina was explaining is that the awakening process can be difficult for relationships. It's actually very common to have relationships falter once you start going through that awareness process, because you become aware that you and your partner are shifting. The dynamic between you guys is not the same. And so there can be a lot of things that change, and it can be a little overwhelming. One of the things that can happen if you are, say, a channel, is that voices start to come, and traditionally speaking, you know, in our culture, when you start hearing voices, it's time to call the paddy wagon, right? Like, it's time to start questioning your sanity, when in fact, what is actually happening is that you are having an experience where the divine is starting to try and communicate with you verbally. Now, what isn't entirely evident at first is that the divine has been trying to communicate with you the entire time. It's just that through that opening, through that awakening process, it's a stronger there's a stronger emphasis on the verbal piece of the communication, but likely you've been feeling, seeing, and maybe even writing off what's been going on with you throughout your awakening process. And we have Katrina back.
Hello, I'm sorry. Yeah, I did the same thing I did last week. I didn't plug my laptop in and I thought the battery would sustain. So insert smart stuff, smart stuff, smart stuff, clever stuff, smart stuff, and that's what I said.
I was just, I was recounting what you were saying about how hard this is on relationships, and
It is
getting
difficult.
into
Yeah.
when, like, if you're a channel, when you start hearing voices, and how traditionally speaking, like,
Mm-hmm.
voices are the thing that people actually denote as a crazy moment, but it's just the divine trying to come through and speak to you. And sometimes this happens, verbally, and how this is just a notation of the stronger, like, the stronger emphasis of that connection. So you've already been spoken to by the divine, um, through feelings, through signs and symbols in your environment, but you probably wrote them off, and that's where that's where I left off.
Well, and it's really got to do the way that you are going to be perceived as mentally unbalanced, even by yourself, will depend on the type of psychic connection that you establish or energetic connection that you establish. And that's what Gladys and I call the eclairs, because you've got the clairvoyant, which is you're physically seeing the thing. You've got the clairaudient, which is you're hearing the thing. You've got the clairsentient, which is that you're sensing the thing. You've got I don't even remember all the clairs. She's the parapsychological
Claircognizance,
psychologist.
I think that was the last
But
one.
any of that is enough that it's going to make you feel like you're going off your gourd. And there is, I teach about this in my energy magic class, where I say that there is an effect, and I cannot remember the name of the phenomenon, but where once you notice something, you can't stop seeing it. So if
Oh,
you buy
yes.
a certain car and you haven't noticed that this type of Volvo is on the road ever, all of a sudden you start seeing them everywhere.
Yes, and there's a book called E Squared that
Ooh.
goes into that phenomena, if anybody's interested.
So once you start even just tangentially investigating energy work, you recognize that there's this whole world out there that you didn't know about. And so you start to handpick different things like, ooh, I think I like crystals and I'm going to get into that. Ooh, these oils are really wonderful. And it's a slippery slope into hearing the voices and seeing the things. And I think that's why a lot of people that give us warnings about new age, the dark secret of the new age and things like that, is that it does open up something in you that was likely open in humankind for a long time for survival issues, but then we got lazy and complacent because life got easy, and so it all got closed off. And
Yep.
as that reopens, it's like another sense develops, that sixth sense, another sense comes up, and you get excited about it. And So you start investigating all these other things. You find out, oh my gosh, there's all this community of people who are interested in this. And it gets really enticing and exciting. And as that happens, you start to notice more phenomenon because you are now in the zone. And we talk about the dark secrets of it and how it's very, mental healthy, and that there's mental health issues involved with this. It's also very joyful. It's also very
Absolutely.
fun. When I was working in Wicca, we called it Wiki, which was that time when you just first discover Wicca and you're like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. Oh my gosh, this is so fun. Ooh, look at the candle. It's doing this. Oh, wow, look at how the smoke's going. It's doing that. So you almost become like this little kindergartner. Very
Before you
excited.
get jaded and you're like, oh man, I forgot my full moon stuff.
Yeah, I
Damn
mean,
it.
there's that. So, there's an excitement and a euphoria that comes with it as well. That's part of why it's so enticing. And then there's that part where you recognize we're not just playing here. This isn't
Right.
just the dancing flame on the candle. This isn't just the fact that, oh, wow, I did the spell and the thing really happened. It's about being the gatekeeper and the torch carrier and the person that has to be responsible for those magical actions, and the type of person that has to be. And you really have to be ready. And some people are not. And and even if you are, it's a challenge. And I
Right.
think that that's where the mental health issues come up. And also, once you get excited about it, often you expend too much energy and you end up exhausted.
Yes. Yes.
And
If especially if you're holding to some sort of regimen or ritual that you saw on social media where the person was like, "Oh yes, get up at 4:44." And it's like,
Mhm.
well, I understand the draw, and it's not for us to yuck anybody's yum, but it is it does that actually fit into your life? Are you doing I saw this great meme today that talked about self-care. What people most people deem as self-care is actually aftercare.
Mhm.
So
I agree.
if
Yes.
you haven't been, taking care of yourself, getting up at 4:44 is not going to do anything for you. Your guides are going to try to connect with you. You're going to be exhausted. You're not going to be functional. And then there's going to be a litany of other challenges that take away from those joyful aspects that Katrina was just talking about. Now, I'm so glad we had a question in the audience, and I think it's worth addressing because I get this question all the time. So, what would you recommend as good reading to get better connected with the divine? Colleen, thank you so much for your comment. So I am all for books. If you could see my bedroom, two bookcases, and the closet's top shelf where clothes are supposed to be is all books. And then there's books under my bed. So I'm definitely a what do they call them? A
Bibliophile.
bibliophile. Yes. Some great books. Katrina has written most of them. So just
Aw.
go to Amazon, type in Katrina Rasbold, and you'll find a lot of great books on energy work. And I believe that that's a perfect, like, energy work to me is a really balanced gateway into connecting with the divine because it addresses your healing needs as well as that relationship of connection necessary to create change in your life. So rather than just trying to open your third eye and do the thing, make sure that you have some balance with that. Another great read is Opening to Channel
I was just going to suggest that
by
one.
Sanaya Choquette. I may be saying her name right. It might be wrong. It might be Sonia Choquette. Um, but Opening to Channel was how I got into channeling. My mentor did it. She taught us a lot. And then when that relationship transitioned, I dove into that book, and I believe she has like recordings and meditations you can use alongside the book as well. So Opening the Channel is really awesome. But beyond books, and I don't know how you feel about this, Katrina, I think classes are important because that book's not going to talk back to you. Um, I think finding a mentor is important, even if it's only for a month or less. I think these things are inherently needed, because before, like in the earlier days, not very long ago, like 2011, 2012, the pace was a lot slower as far as the awakening process is going. And so you had the time to read the book, put it down, and live your life and come back to it. I don't think that is the case anymore. And the danger of picking up the book and just trying the exercises in it is not knowing what you're getting into, or not having specific intentions. And this is where things can get a little muddy. Not, and I guess I shouldn't really use the word danger, because it's not dangerous, but there's there's a lot to be said for a teacher that can say to you, hey, have you considered this? Not necessarily somebody to shoot down your every whim or desire, but um someone to say, to question, okay, well, if that's what you want to do, tell me why. What's your end goal? Like, I had somebody very recently say to me, well, I'm abstaining from sex because I want to cut my energy off from another person. And I said, that's not that may not get you the result that you're looking for. You're withholding energy, but you're not actively taking your power back in that moment. And I even went as far as to say, the act that created the connection may have to be something that you recreate on your own to disassemble that connection, along with candles and cleansings and whatever else you're going to do. But just holding on to your energy doesn't pull it away from another person. Now, had we not had that conversation, that view, even if it's, and I'm not saying I'm right or wrong about the method, but the consideration of the method and the end goal would not have been in play. It would have just been throwing spaghetti at the wall, hoping for the best. And the person even made a comment to say that their technique or their method wasn't working. And so this is why, a book isn't going to tell you that it's not working. The book is going to say, try this, try that. These could be your results, but over time, our experiences expand. So that was a long way to say, go for more than books. And then Colleen was asking about which books, Katrina, of yours do you?
Not any of them. I don't teach this in any of the books.
Oh, Connecting with the Divine.
I wrote great books, but none about. You know what? The closest I could think of would be Reuniting the Two Selves.
Okay.
Because this is about the I'm trying to think of the right word. It's about the connection of the higher self and the conscious self.
So there was one
that helps to be able to hear what you need to hear.
There was one, I'm looking it up now. My partner just got his hands on it and he loves it. But I guess with your books, maybe it's not that, and I'm not telling you what you wrote, of course, but even like
all of them, so
the little book of the properties of magical energy.
Yeah.
So that one, like right in the beginning, goes into referencing God and how, we operate with that terminology and how it exists and things like that. So I guess that's where I'm getting like that connecting to the divine piece.
Yeah, for sure. The one Reuniting the Two Selves is in Beyond Energy Magic.
Okay.
And it's also available on ebook, and it goes into the construct of God and higher self and conscious self and how all of those interact. So that's probably the one that's closest to that.
Okay.
Another thing I'd really recommend is there are amazing lead meditations on YouTube. And there's a guy named Steve Noble who does a really wonderful it's like a violet flame meditation that's fantastic. And some of those are really great at opening up the chakras that you're working with in order to effectively connect with the divine.
Excellent. So I just dropped in the
Yeah,
chat, guys, for Facebook at the very
thank you.
least, although Colleen's on YouTube, so you'll have to check that out. But on Facebook, I was at least able to drop in Beyond the Energy Magic. So check it out. There's a lot of great books out there. I think that, and like Katrina was saying, there's a lot of awesome YouTube videos. I don't think there's any harm in trying things. I mean, at the very least, you're going to find out what doesn't work for you. And so, go for it. One of the things that I think is interesting about the awakening process is that there is some assumption that, like, lower, how do I say this? Lower frequency people can't go through an awakening. Um, and that is not true.
Right.
They go through their own evolutions and their own processes. And it's very important to remember that spirituality is not something that's earned. It is something that a person steps into, buys into, changes their belief systems to engage with. And so it's very common to actually see spiritual narcissism in spiritual communities, especially if you have a person who is sort of trying to separate everybody or trying to make you feel less than as you go through your process. And I don't mean that you're intimidated by them. That's a personal internal thing. But literally, like, you come to them and and nothing you go through is relevant, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. I mean, there's going to be people that aren't excited. They're like, oh yeah, I remember when. That's fine. But if this person is like, oh, is that all? Then maybe consider that negative mentality as just them and not a marker for their level of spirituality. I remember my mentor telling me, and I've said this a couple times on the show, that integrity is a choice. Spiritual integrity is a choice. And so what happens when you see the awakening process take place in people in the way that we were talking earlier, it highlights things that aren't working in a narcissistic personality or in a personality that is, I would say, of a lower vibration, or in a negative space. You start to see almost like an egomania. And they can start to try and control and influence the people around them. I have had clients come to me and say, well, this person says that they're my twin flame, and the only way that I will spiritually ascend is if I'm with them. And that is so fucking false and scary and harmful. I mean, I don't know if you've ever come across, I'm sure you have come across these things. You've been doing it longer, Katrina.
It's really sad that there's this part of the energetic community out there, and that it, quite frankly, is a large part of it. I'd like to say that it's fewer people that behave that way, but there's not. And part of the reason is that the hierarchy in pagan and energetic communities that are working with energy, the hierarchy is really fuzzy. There's no delineation as far as who advances and who's an elder and who's a guru and who's this and who's that. And so a lot of it becomes self-appointed. And I see it all the time, just exactly what you're describing. And the one-upmanship, it's as though you come to your mentor with some revelating experience that you've had that you really want to unpack and discuss with them a little bit further. I had this vision. I saw this and this. I was out in the woods and I had this sudden knowing that la la la. And it becomes, oh, you saw one demon. Well, wait till you see three, little girl. And you start to feel like you brought them a picture that you colored in preschool, and they're like, oh yeah, that's really pretty, sweetheart, when it was something impacting and life-changing for you. So it does turn into this ego game, and it often does turn into something of control. We have had covens in the area that would say you can't practice with anybody else. You can't go to rituals that without our approval or without one of us attending. It's very cult-like sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's terrible when that happens, because people think that that's how it's supposed to be, and it's really
Right.
not how it's supposed to be. We have had plenty of people that, I mean, I could just, without even trying, give names of a dozen that really abused their power. They were horrible to people. They were predatory with people. They were controlling with people when that didn't need to be how that learning process happened. It
Right.
also doesn't mean the mentor doesn't have anything to offer. It means that they have reached or somehow gone sideways into a place where they equate being useful, meaning you're a fucking tool,
Mm.
with somehow being God or somehow being a divine figure. And you're not that. You're just another person who has had longer years of experience. And I've had plenty of my students that were first year students that teach me things and have experiences I didn't have. And everybody has their weave, everybody has their part of the fabric. And I think that when people set themselves up in that sort of way, they are missing out on so much by not being open to empowering their students to teach them in some ways.
Absolutely. Kay said it best a little bit earlier, with great power comes great responsibility. And that Spider-Man quote. Absolutely. And I love that you brought into our awareness, Katrina, how a mentor would have their run time with you, and that they still have something to teach you. I mean, my probably had to be my second mentor. She was fantastic, taught me so many things, and at the point that she couldn't teach me anymore, everything that I did was less than.
Ooh.
Everything that I did was, no, don't do it like that. And it was like, it was almost like, and if I've had a couple people talk to me about people they're working with, and they get to this place where it's like, don't, the mentor is almost like, don't go further than I am,
Mm-hmm.
don't surpass me. And it's such a sad moment, but
For everybody.
a lot of these things can begin, like that sort of descent can begin in the awakening, like the original awakening programming. Whatever belief systems you formulated in your awakening process, if you were already sort of very self-centered and self-focused, and everything was, people need to listen to me, and you never got a chance to grow beyond that, it's going to be exacerbated by the opening process, and then it's just going to get worse with time. Now,
Mm-hmm.
people do change, but most don't have the incentive to do so. There will these people, these individuals, we'll just call them spiritual narcissists, um, have a place in the fabric, and have a place in I think our collective, and they have their job and their piece and all of it, so they're around probably to show us contrast, because that has to be a part of it. But they are working on themselves too. But like I said, I think it's a very common misunderstanding to see a situation where you assume that somebody who has like real real diagnosable mental health challenges, like to say that they can't awaken, or can't infiltrate different communities and different spaces.
Mm-hmm. I
Um,
completely, I agree with everything that you just said. And one of the things that our therapist, our staff therapist, Nicole, is quick to point out is that people who exhibit narcissistic tendencies are in fact broken people. This is not, you are not born that way. It's a trauma response that
right.
occurs. And so too often we just say, "Oh, that's I just smelled a whiff of narcissism,
Yeah.
so you are a bad person." And that's not really what it is. It's a matter of trauma response and healing that occurs. And sometimes there's some mental illness in there, such as possibly an Asperger relation where we're not able to be empathetic or to predict accurately how a person is going to react to what you're saying and doing. And so when we have compassion for those people in our community, it helps the community overall. But when those people are empowered, it is very damaging.
Right.
And the trick about it is that most of the time, those people can be very charismatic and very charming. And so people do get kind of under the spell. They do get pulled into that and don't realize there's a problem until very suddenly there's a problem. And a lot of times the people around them have become kind of immune to that
Mhm.
behavior. So you're the one sitting here going, "Am I the only one that thinks this person's an asshole?"
Yeah. Very and thank you, Nicole, for that piece. This isn't for us to go around and start, diagnosing folks left and right. But to merely emphasize the terminology, and yes, they are going through their healing process. And this goes back to the stigmatization. If we are harping on the negative aspects of these personalities, um, there is no transition for them, but they're still evolving. And so it's something that, like, there's no one way to deal with all of these things, but I think it's important to become aware of, even within yourself, because the psychological community has pointed out to us that we all have elements of narcissism within us, and it can be on a scale depending on if what model of psychology you're following. And so, if you're going around naming people, also you may have some things going on within yourself, because oftentimes the things that we recognize we have. So I want to say thank you to Nicole for that. And speaking of people being in power, Sylvia was relating a story as well, of her trust being broken in one opportunity of a sacred moment.
Mhm.
These things happen, and to that, it's clear, like Katrina was saying, maybe that's the time that things have shifted. Now that relationship is drawing to a close, and you just know, and you don't. I mean, you can leave however you want to. I guess my philosophy is, to part ways quietly, just because, again, like Katrina was saying, they're going through their healing process, and hopefully you've reached a point in your healing process where uh it's easier or easily accessible to not take it personally, because you shouldn't. It's not usually a personal stance. When someone comes in to try and control you with what they've learned or their awakening or what have you. Um, so,
One of the things that you mentioned that I really want to talk about a little bit is that idea of the student surpassing the teacher. And in good instruction, that's our ambition. And the reason for that is the growth of, I don't know, the movement or evolution of the human condition. Because if we all only reached a certain point and stopped, then nothing moves forward. It's not just the person that doesn't move forward, nothing moves forward. And so we want each student to surpass their teacher, and then we want their students to surpass them, because that keeps the growth effort alive. And there's an old saying that a religion, this is speaking specifically to religion, a religion that doesn't grow is a dead religion.
mm,
And so people say, oh, Wicca isn't what it used to be. Well, of course it's not. You know, if it was what it used to be, there would still just be run by old, gross men who want to see their coven mates naked. You know, now Wicca is a thriving, beautiful celebration of the seasons that wasn't as much in play in the early parts of Wicca. Wicca grew, religions grow, and spiritual paths grow. And the way that they grow is that each generation makes it their own. Each level of instruction goes past where it was led in order to keep the road moving forward. And so anybody who would stop that and say, oh, you can't, even subconsciously, I'm not just saying the words, but just having the attitude of you can't be better than I am, has just stopped evolutionary movement.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me negates any contribution that you made to it.
And you'll feel that. You'll feel that from them wholeheartedly. And, there are people that are still, in their awakening process, feeling like they've gone far enough to teach others, to bring others in. And I think it's beautiful that the introduction happens, right? Like, hey, this is what I've been looking at. I want to share it with you, brings it all together. And where the disharmony is feeling like you have to be on the same track, you have to be developing at the same time, and that can be an insidious place for this sort of like non-development, this stagnation, for it to kind of grow and say like, hey, well, you know I've been working on this, haven't you? And it's there's supposed to be so much more of a dynamic energy. I mean, each of us is going through those different shifts, and one of the things that I think is really pertinent to this, that Katrina was seeing this week, is transitions. So
Sorry.
no, it's
That
good.
was me.
So what kinds of transitions were you seeing? I mean, I know I was seeing sort of the awakening process. What about the transitions you were seeing this week?
Definitely seeing the awakening process in a lot of people, hearing the words. I recently had a spiritual awakening and blah, 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 blah. You know, here comes, and I need this, or I think I need this, or I don't know what I need. I'm being led to this. But also transitions. A lot of people are moving to different phases of their lives right now. They're retiring, they're having babies, they're taking on new jobs, they're moving to new houses, they're having new relationships start up, they're getting divorces. All sorts of transition is happening right now, more so than your average back and forth pull and tug sort of thing. And in times of transition is when we have to adapt our spiritual outlook to what is happening now. And this is not one size fits all, and it's not one spiritual situation fits our entire life. So when people ask me what my spiritual affiliation is, you know, it's been many things over my life. And it has adapted as my life has changed into different things and into different situations. I'm going into a situation next week where I felt I very strongly wanted goddess energy around me. And I hadn't worked goddess energy in a very long time. I'd been very Santa Marte focused, and I'm working with her as well. But I really wanted that mother goddess feeling around me. And so I made a focus wall that has my goddess figures all on it, and just got some cards that supported the goddess idea and brought that into play. And so we should always have in our arsenal different things that we can activate or check out if our circumstances are transitioning and we need a different feel spiritually, and just really be fearless about trying out those different things to see what works.
Absolutely. And having those conversations of what's been tried, and what your experiences are and what you're going through is a great way. There may be things like Katrina was saying, she's even had students talk to her about their processes and what they're transitioning through, that has taught her. And so, that spiritual arsenal, that toolbox can be built through these conversations, is when people are not being sort of pushed down or pushed aside by larger talking heads. So, and yes, Colleen, we definitely want to continue to learn and give back to the next generation. And I think in the conversation, it's giving back in a way that doesn't say, you need to adhere to my old standards that may be starting to become outdated, but more from this place of like, hey, we used to do this thing, and while 100% of it may not be relevant anymore, there may be these little pieces that are still active and
Mhm.
good. You reach back into that toolbox, like Katrina was saying with the goddess energy. She reached back in her toolbox. I remember a couple weeks back, I was on here talking about working with oracle cards, and I'm very tarot focused, and it was just nice to reconnect. It was refreshing. um, and then sometimes when you've had your awakening and you've shifted out of that in one way or another, you find balance. Don't be afraid to go back and reach in for you're standing in the grass to ground when you know how to do Reiki to clear the energy. A lot of those old friendly tools they're so helpful, and when you pick them back up, it's like reconnecting with a friend. So absolutely, learning, giving back, and going through books will help, like you asked about, Colleen. Community and mentorship are really the other places you'll find those things, to help you get through that awakening process. So
And really just we when we talk about the darker sides of awakening and how it forces us to look at certain aspects of ourselves that we might have neglected or not developed, this isn't meant to be a scary thing. It's meant to be an exciting thing, a purifying thing, an evolutionary thing. If we just always ignore what's painful, it's going to continue to hurt.
absolutely.
And we all come into an adult experience with damage and with challenges and cracks that have to be repaired. And this really helps us to look at all the places in our lives where we need help. And it's as though that energy has a healing effect, and sometimes healing hurts.
Yeah.
So it comes into us and just finds all the places that are struggling and says, "Hey, look at this. This needs some attention here." And so it's really a wonderful process when you surrender to it and find the wisdom in it, rather than just nope, not going to do that. That's too much self exploration for me. That's the unexamined life, which is not the one that we want to be living.
Right. And on the topic of fear, I think it can be really a beautiful process to engage with some of the things that you're concerned about. So I know through my earlier days, there were things that the church had told me that I was just like, now that I'm opening up to new information, I wonder what the validity of this actually is. And it took me finding people, like, if you want to know what it's like to be a practicing witch, go to Crossroads. You will find several, and you can ask them what their life is like. And what you will find is these are amazing people, and that you were probably lied to by other bodies and organizations about what individuals believe and how they practice and how they do things. And, you know, the cool thing about exploring some of these things is that you will find yourself. you know I know in my explorations, I found a love of candles. But did I feel like I needed to call myself a witch? No. I it felt like if I did that, I wanted to honor the practice. Not that there was anything wrong with it, but like, it's the same reason I don't call myself a shaman, even though I might have been taught by many or operate in different capacities. If I didn't go to, into the forest and come out the other side a shaman, it's not something that I feel like I should engage with. As far as titles are concerned. But I all of that to say, I think it's worth reading books. If you're too afraid to talk to somebody about their lifestyle and how they live it, or people are busy too, so don't just be like, well, tell me about yourself and assume that somebody has time to do that. But read the books. There are so many people I've talked to where they're like, no, I'm afraid to read that spell book. And I'm like, why? It's pages, it's words on a paper, you know? It's not, the book is not gonna, it's not the Necronomicon. It's not gonna grow teeth and bite you, you know? So exploring the things that you have concerns about is it can be a wonderful practice as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that if something catches our interest, it's done so for a reason.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And there are things that might cycle back through. Like, I know in the beginning I was averse to oils. I didn't like the texture. I'm a texture person. Oils were too much. And now I'm like, I oil everything. So you might find that you weren't into tarot cards before, but they start calling your name, or whatever the case is. But
And your experience can also speak to the books you read. I had Susanna Budapest's Holy Woman's Book of Mysteries for 3 years. And when I first got, this was back in the, gosh, I would say late 80s. And I read it and said, this isn't pulling me in. I'm not appreciating what she's done here. It's just not my thing. I don't love it. About 5 years later, I read the book and was like, this is the most amazing book ever written. How have I had it all this time and not realized that it's so great? And so at different times in our lives, as our awakening progresses, we will be called to more and more things. I do not, Kay. Do you, Dahlia?
so Kay is asking about books on Voodoo or diaspora. I can probably get you some titles. There's one that comes to mind. I think the author is Queen Afua or Queen Afua, but I am not 100% on that. That's why I'm stammering. But I think I've seen some titles under her, and I appreciate her writing. Um,
My experience is so limited in that particular field. I have phenomenal, incredible admiration for the people who follow this path because it's a very rigorous path
yeah.
and extremely demanding. I went to a presentation on it and they talked about having 3 and 5 day rituals and being ridden for a couple of days. And I thought, my God, I don't even want to do something that feels good for 3 days. Uh, so that was just like, wow, I am just too pansy for this because they were just so fervent, and it was enticing to see how excited they were about and passionate they were about their practice. And I admired that and wanted that. But wow, it was just such a huge, huge undertaking.
Yeah. So we'll get back to you, okay?
Yeah.
So all of that said, we are at that time again. Time flies.
It
We
just
must be
does.
fun. Thank you everyone for your comments and your interactions and connecting with us on Facebook and YouTube. Remember to like and subscribe. I always forget to say that, but just so you know when we're on, we'll catch your comments afterward too if anything comes up. And remember, this awakening process, be gentle with yourself and make no assumptions. I think that's probably like, if I had to total everything up, make no assumptions and enjoy the process. There's no rules. Find mentorship, find community, ask questions, and remember that negativity doesn't go away. So ride the roller coaster and figure it out for yourself, and then share it with the rest of us. We're eager to hear about it.
Also, one other thing I would add is that people tend to have the false assumption that because there are practitioners of what I do and what Dahlia does out there who are really seeking a greater good, a higher level, an actualization, They think that because that's the case, that and how a lot of people believe, that somehow this world that she and I walk in is more resistant to narcissism. It's more resistant
No,
to the dark side of things and to people's flaws. And let me tell you, it's just not. I mean, people demonize the Christian church, they demonize Catholicism, they demonize what we do. There are always ups and downs. There are always good things and bad things about every path. And there are just as many assholes in what we do as there is anywhere else. There are just as many frauds, just as many hypocrites. That is the human condition. And
absolutely.
that doesn't change. What we just have to do is just be the best people that we can be, no matter what spiritual path we're walking.
Absolutely. I love that. Couldn't have said it better myself. Everybody has what's the saying? I won't try to say it, but it was a joke about assholes. Anyway. Thank you guys for joining us for another episode of Crossroads of Cognizance. Catch us on the replay. And other than that, we wish you a great evening. We'll see you next week. And good night, everyone.
Night.
Bye.